Stuff I did not anticipate getting into on Red Corner, Blue Corner right here on Stadium. Jake Butt, former Wolverine, is joining me representing the Blue Corner.
Joshua Perry, former Buckeye, representing the Red Corner.
And we want to bring you into this show as well, the fans. We want to get interactive with you, so go ahead and scan that QR code on the screen. Who will win this weekend's game between Iowa and Wisconsin? We also need you to get into that YouTube chat. We've been rolling your comments. Some of you have really good things to say. Others of you, not so much, but we'll still put it up there anyway.
Let's talk about this game, but from a different angle, right? Because it's been hammered at nauseum for the past few years talking about Iowa's offense, right? All right, look, it is what it is. But I don't think it stops there, and I want to explore this from a personal experience I had back in my early days at Michigan, where our offense was struggling. One game stands out in particular. We're playing Michigan State on the road. Horrendous output by our offense. The defense was holding their own. And what ended up, there was a divide in the team. When we would go 3 and out or turn the ball over, the defense is taking the field and they're yelling at us. And it caused issues, right? It broke down the foundation of our team. Iowa finds themselves, at least statistically, in a very similar situation right now where we laugh and we poke fun at the Iowa offense every week, but the defense and special teams show up and we wonder, how do they keep doing this? Joshua, what's your opinion on the state of the locker room, and maybe what do you think the locker room is even like right now?
I mean, I think frustration is natural. If you're a defender in that locker room, you're looking, and I'll take last week for an example, you're looking at the backup quarterback in Deacon Hill and you're saying, dude, 26% passing is not going to cut it. Not being able to find a wide receiver all game is not going to cut it. And so I think there's part of that where you get the finger pointing and you get the blame game that goes on. But we saw what happened in the offseason with Brian Ferentz and his contract, and those players knew exactly what was going on. And there were transfer windows that they could have hopped in the portal and said, I'm too good of a player to be here, and the game is only going to be the defense. I'm too good of a player to stick around and be on a team where I'm not exactly sure where we're going to be because one side of the ball is so bad at what they do. So those players knew it. I think there are a lot of guys in that locker room that are like, hey, you know what? Don't even worry about the offense. Don't even worry about what's going on that side of the football because it's about us. This is a program that's built on defense. We're built on special teams, and we can win the game. They want to put points on the scoreboard. We can do that ourselves, and maybe that's how you hold this thing together.
Yeah, I think the expectation, what you just touched on there, is a big reason for why they're able to hold this together. Because the defense probably already knows what it is, right? They know that their margin for error is 0, and in fact, it has to be even. They have to find ways to score points or put their offense in favorable positions anyways. We are critical about Kirk Ferentz. We are critical about Brian Ferentz, and that is totally fair. But I do think something that doesn't, we have to acknowledge the fact that Kirk has done a good job of shutting out all the outside noise.
Yes.
There is many teams that would crumble with the jokes that run on Twitter on every single given week. So I want to give him credit for holding the culture together, but I also want to look at this again from another angle. And I think someone in the locker room as a player on the offensive side of the football has to stand up and say, guys, like, this is not all on Brian. This is not all on Deacon Hill or Cade McNamara when he was in there, or Spencer Petras last year. Everyone has their hands in this pot right now. Someone has to stand up and say in the receiver room, guys, we're dropping passes left and right. We have no margin for error anyways. We have to make all the easy ones, and then we still have to make the challenging ones as well. Someone has to stand up and say, we're hitting jugs after practice. We're catching 100 balls each. Someone in the offensive line says, guys, I know meetings only go till 6 tonight. We're having a player-led meeting until 7:30 until we get this thing figured out. The running backs help out with the pass protection. Deacon Hill, you got to hit all the things in the flat as well. Like, Kirk has done his job of keeping this locker room together, but it's on the players to figure out a solution now at this point. And I wonder, does the defense then have to get involved in this conversation? Say, guys, we need your help a little bit here. You know, are you saying that as a captain, as a leader? Is there a stand-up in the meeting? Because all their goals are on the table. Everything's in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the talking has been done, right? Like, I think part of it is that they've had those conversations. It would be hard for me to believe that there wasn't a defensive player that leaned on the offense and said, hey, guys, we're doing our part. We need you to rise up to the occasion, too. And I agree with you. Kirk Ferentz is doing a wonderful job of keeping his team together. I also think that you can look at the way that they have recruited on offense and the philosophy that's been allowed to exist there the last few years, and you can say that's on the head coach as well. So really interesting, but the biggest thing that I take away from this whole experiment is the fact that we could be looking at a team by the end of the year, in theory, that only has one loss. going into a Big Ten championship game. That is a crazy spot to be at for how poor their offense has been. Now, we have encouraged viewers to get in on the show, and we want you to ask us questions live on air. And our guy, Matt Goldman from Columbus, sent us in a question, so let's hear what he has to say.
Joshua and Jake, what's up? So Ohio State got off to a real slow start this past weekend against Maryland. Their offensive line, as Joel Klatt said, is abysmal. Is Ryan Day at fault for not making changes in the offensive line, or is there someone else to blame? Why is this offensive line not doing that well? And they Penn State coming up, they need to get things going.
All right, Jake, I'll let you get the first crack at this.
I want to go back to last year, and I want to go back to the offseason conversation, because the whole conversation was on how do you replace C.J. Stroud.
Sure.
Ohio State lost 3 linemen to the draft last year. Okay, so you're replacing 3 NFL guys. Well, how are they doing in the NFL? Well, they're standing out. They stood out in the preseason. They stood out early. So You're replacing 3 elite NFL talent. You don't just go 1 for 1. Yes, that does then come on coaching. That does come on leadership within the locker room. But that in mind, this has been my storyline for the whole year for Ohio State. This sets their ceiling. I have no worries about the skill. I think McCord's fine. I actually think he's progressing. But one thing about an offensive line or trenches in general, when you have a good offensive line, everything's easier. When your offensive line is playing below standard, everything is harder. And McCord isn't there right now to overcome poor offensive line play. Last week, Joshua, they didn't even average 2 yards per carry against Maryland. Penn State's going to be a bigger challenge. Michigan's going to be a bigger challenge. Abysmal is a fair word. They've been abysmal at times. I still think there's room for them to grow.
Yeah, I'm with you on just about everything that you said. And I think the biggest thing that stands out is when you have guys leave, what we've been accustomed to for Ohio State is the fact that they've been able to just reload. It's not a rebuilding process necessarily. They haven't recruited and developed very well at the offensive line. That is apparent to me. And the idea that Kyle McCord is progressing, and the thing that stands out to me about Kyle McCord's game is he's a dude that steps up and responds in big situations. Had a terrible first half against Maryland, stepped up, had a really good second half. In the Notre Dame game, they needed a final drive, and there were some questionable passes there, but he rose to the occasion every time and responded with the right play after some bad plays. I'm not worried about any of that, but if they cannot put him in a position to be successful, if they can't use the run game to help their quarterback out because their offensive line is not playing well, this is where the challenges really come.
I want to ask you a real quick question. When you won the national championship, how much credit did you give to that offensive line throughout the season? How important were they in your success?
It was really important, right? And they had NFL guys on there, but the one position where we were weak was right tackle, and that was a guy who never played in the league, but he got better game after game. It's the one thing I'm not necessarily seeing right now from Ohio State is that the guys are getting better and better game after game. Now, we talked about how recruiting might help Ohio State on the offensive line, but take a look at Michigan. It was done well across the board in the recruiting trail, top 20 in each of the last 5 seasons, but that does not impress Indiana's Jalen Lucas.
I feel that, like, everybody think Michigan is a big powerhouse, but I feel like here, like, we got the same type of athletes those teams have, but I'm just ready to play, man. We all ready.
You got the same type of athletes. I mean, what do you think?
Oh, yeah, this is one that you say it and maybe you don't realize how bad it is, and then you get out of it and you look at your phone and Twitter's blowing up. You're like, oh, my God, what was I thinking? There's no way he could possibly believe this, right? I respect the confidence. You should never go in there waving the white flag to a game. But at some point, you got to be real. This is one of the most talented rosters in college football. No one's saying that about Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be rude to the kids, but we're going to be honest about what Indiana's got going. It feels like they have more of a MAC offensive line than a Big Ten offensive line. Their skill positions are not up to par with what they have going on. They've got some really good skill players. Like individually, there are some guys that stand out.
Defensive side of the ball, too.
Yeah, but if we evaluate as a whole, 1 for 1, if we went down the line, you would pick 90% the Michigan guys over the Indiana guys. That's kind of how the game of college football works. We always talk about the lack of parity. Part of that is personnel. Finite resources, you got to spread them out. And Michigan's been able to get a majority of those guys. Ohio State and Penn State have done that too. Indiana is not a team who can recruit in the same world as them. And I would even look at Jalen Lucas as a phenomenal player.
Sure.
But when I see him physically, That's not a stature that's imposing,
Yeah.
right? That's the difference between a place like Indiana and a place like Michigan. The dudes all look like NFL dudes at Michigan. At Indiana, they might have a few, but that's not the whole roster.
Look, as far as athlete goes, like, listen, Jalen Lucas is one of them. He's a great athlete. The problem when you say one of these, when you say a comment like this, now it's on you to go out there and prove it. So you're kind of setting yourself up to failure. It's always better to just say, hey, we respect them. You know, we got some work. We have some areas to improve upon. When you make a grand statement like this, Michigan doesn't need any help being motivated. You just gave them bulletin board material, and now you have to go back it up in a scenario that was already hard enough to back it up anyways.
Real quick, chances that they can pull off the upset?
I can't say 0%, but it's less than 1%. It's just a really bad matchup. These programs are in two completely different places right now.
Yeah, I would fully agree with that statement. All right, we're going to take a break right here on Red Corner, Blue Corner. Coming up, we're going to open up the mailbag and respond to some of your questions, have a little conversation with our guy Sam Brief. That's coming in just a few, but be sure to keep it right here on Stadium for Inside the Association. Our guy Sham Sharania will join the crew to help break down the latest in the WNBA Finals. That's at 3 p.m. Eastern coming up.